Now for this story, we have a little piece of the desert here because this story takes place in the desert. Now the desert is a dangerous place. The wind blows and the sand moves, and it's always changing. So it can be easy to lose your way. And it can be very difficult to find water and food in the desert. So it can be difficult for plants and animals and people to survive. And in the desert, during the day, it can be very, very, very hot. But at night, it can be very, very, very cool. So people don't generally go to the desert unless they really have to. Now, after the Great Flood, and the people and the animals went to the four corners of the earth to fill it with life again, they would often go by rivers, so they could be near the water. So the people would settle by the river, and villages grew into cities. And one of the most important cities of the time was a city called Ur, and there was also a city called Haran. Now, in the city of Ur, they believed in many gods. They had gods for plants, gods for the animals, gods for the moon and the sun and the stars. The world was alive with gods. But there was one family that believed there was only one God, and that one God was in everything and everywhere. And in that family was Abram and Sarai. Now, when it was time to move from Ur to Haran, Abraham and Sarai started their journey, and they did not know if God would be with them along the way. But they started their journey with all of their family members and the animals and their helpers. And it was a long journey. And they went along the Euphrates River so they would have water to drink, and it would help show them the way to the city of Haran. And when they began to get close to the city, they began to see travelers on the road, and they knew that they were almost there. Now, when they were in Haran, Abram liked to go out to the desert, to be under the many stars in the sky and among all of the grains of sand in the desert. And he would be close to God, and God would be very close to him. And so Abram knew that God wanted him to journey on to another place. So Abram and Sarai took not all of their family, but much of their family, and Abram's brother's son Lot, and helpers and animals, and they went west to Canaan. And this time, they did not have a river to follow. They did not have the benefit of having the water. And first they came to Shechem. And when they arrived there, Abram prayed to God, and God was there. And they climbed a hill, and because God was there, they built an altar. And then they continued on with their journey. And next they came to a city called Bethel. And they prayed to God, and God was there. And they realized that God was not just in one town or another town, but God was everywhere. And they built another altar because God was there. So then they continued on with their journey, and they came to the town of Hebron. And they prayed to God, and God told them that this is where they should make their home. And they made their home underneath the oaks of Mamre in Hebron. One night, God took Abram out into the night in the desert, under the sky. And God was so close to Abram, and Abram was so close to God. Abram knew what God was telling him. And God told Abram, "You will be the father of a great family, which will have more members than stars in the sky and grains of sand in the desert. And Sarai will be the mother." And Abram just laughed. He thought it was impossible for him to have a family because he was very old. But God told Abram to change his name to Abraham and Sarai to be called Sarah. So one day, 3 strangers came out of the desert. They came to the tent of Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham invited them in for dinner. And Sarah made 3 portions of flour, which was very generous, and she brought them meat and bread to eat, and milk and water to drink. And the 3 strangers told Abraham, "You will have a son." And Abraham laughed. And Sarah, who was listening outside the tent, she laughed too. They thought that they were too old to have children. And then the 3 strangers left. And then do you know what happened? Abraham and Sarah had a son. And then they left again because they were so surprised. And they named their son Isaac, which means laughter in their language. So Isaac grew up to be a young man. And after Isaac was grown, Sarah, who was very full of years, died. And they buried her in a cave near the oaks of Mamre. Now, Abraham was very sad, and he missed Sarah terribly, but Abraham knew that he had one more thing that he wanted to do. He had to find a wife for Isaac. So he asked one of his helpers to go back to Haran, where he still had family, to see if he could bring back a wife for Isaac. So he traveled back through past Bethel and Shechem. And then he had stopped at a well to get something to drink. And there was a woman there named Rebecca who helped him at the well to get some water for him and his animals. And Rebecca was very courageous and kind. And she asked the helper to come back to to have dinner with her family. And the helper described the great family of Abraham. And Rebecca decided that she wanted to become part of the great family. So Rebecca traveled with the helper back to Hebron. And when Isaac saw them coming, Isaac went out to meet Rebecca. Now, after some time, Rebecca and Isaac got married. And Abraham, who was full of years and very old, died. And they buried him in a cave with Sarah underneath the oaks of Mamre. And Rebecca and Isaac had many children, and they had children, and those children had more children. And this went on for many generations until your grandparents were born, and your parents were born, and you were born, and you became part of the great family. And the great family that has as many as stars in the sky and grains of sand in the desert. So now I wonder, what do you think the best part of this story is? And I wonder, what do you think the most important part of this story is? And I wonder where you see yourself in this story. So thank you for coming and listening to this story. I hope you have a great day.